Welcome to Questions to Eden. I am Jason, the author of the online blog, and today we're going to be going over, is Easter pagan? Now, it's that time of the year when we're going to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that also comes with the caveat of people on the internet coming out of their dens and ridiculing the holiday. Many people like to make claims that Easter is pagan, that Christians copied it from the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, or stole it from the Anglo-Saxon festival Easter, or that bunnies were a fertility pagan symbol and that Christians stole it from pagans. And today we're going to go over those claims and debunk every single one of them. This is not even like a debate among scholars that did Easter have pagan origins. No, it's a pretty consistent agreement among scholars that all of the traditions of Easter are Christian in origin. So we're going to start with the name. Is the name Easter pagan? Now, some say that Easter originates from, like I said, Ishtar or Ostara or her festival Easter, but these claims actually lack complete historical substance, and the arguments utilize logical fallacies and sensational reasoning to try to convince you that what they're saying is true. But whenever we actually look at history and investigate a little further, we do find that these claims are false. One of the easiest ways to debunk this is just to observe every other region across the world. Every other place on Earth calls Easter Pascha, and it is only Germanic and English-speaking regions that call it Easter. Just to begin with, the name Easter does not itself originate with paganism, as it was only when Germanic and English-speaking regions called it the day after the month that it fell in, and that's what we're going to move on to next, because Easter came from the month Eoster Manav. Now, despite the etymology of Easter that I just described there, some will still insist that because it sounds like Ishtar or Eoster, Easter, Ishtar, Easter, like it's just a pure association fallacy. And a fallacy is whenever somebody makes a mistake in their reasoning. And each fallacy, there are different logical fallacies, and each one is identifying the different ways that we can mess up whenever reasoning or thinking about things. The association fallacy specifically is whenever the conclusion that someone makes is derived from a similarity in sound, appearance, or other qualities of two things, and nothing else. So something like Ishtar and Easter sounding similar, therefore Christians copied from Babylonians, but when you actually look at it, there is zero historical connection of Pascha with Ishtar. It just doesn't even, if you even have a slight understanding of history, those claims just don't even make sense. The same thing goes for the festival of Easter, which was supposedly the festival of the Anglo-Saxon goddess Ostara. There is no historical connection to Easter here either, even though there is little to no evidence other than fallacious and sensational reasoning to support the Ishtar copy hypothesis. Some will still say that Easter was copied from this Ostara character in her festival Easter. As for Ostara, we only have a single piece of documentation mentioning her, and it doesn't even suggest that Easter was named after Easter or Ostara. And this mention comes from Saint Bede. He says things like, Eoster Manath has a name which is now translated Paschal month, and which was once called after a goddess of the name Eoster, in whose honor feasts were celebrated in that month. Now they designated that Paschal season by her name, calling the joys of the new rite by the time-honored name of the old observance. The truth is that the name Ostara has etymological connections to the Germanic word Ostaro, which just means springtime. And we don't even know how her followers worshipped her, which Germanic people groups worshipped her, what the worship traditions were, like the rituals and stuff. We don't even know that. We just don't know a lot about Ostara, as the only mention of her is Saint Bede. So the scarce evidence here isn't even sufficient to draw a conclusion that Christians copied from pagans. But where does the name Easter actually come from? So, although the exact origins are a debate, there is a generally held consensus among the scholars, and the main agreement mainly boils down to the fact that the name formed from the time or the month that Pascha fell in. And in Germanic-speaking areas, the month that Pascha fell in was Eostermanath, and it was the 4th month on the Old English calendar. And Resurrection Sunday fell in this month, and with the name of the month eventually being shortened and adopted by Germanic and English-speaking Christians as Easter. It's very similar to like us calling Independence Day the 4th of July, naming the holiday after the month it falls in. It's the same thing with Pascha itself, as Pascha came from Passover, which is the time that Jesus was crucified and rose. He died during Passover, so they adopted the name Pascha. And then in Germanic and English-speaking regions, because the Pascha fell in the month of Eostermanath, they shortened the name of the month and called it Easter. That's all the evidence we have, and the evidence suggests this, and there's not even enough evidence to conclude that they stole it from pagans, so that's the main issue with these claims. So let's move on to some of the Easter traditions, something like the Easter Bunny. A lot of people say that since bunnies, during their mating seasons, they breed a lot and they have a lot of babies. So because of this, they must have been fertility symbols taken from pagan cult traditions. But this is again just false and it's fallacious. And the very first recorded, let me take my watch down here. The very first actual recorded instance of the Easter Bunny is in 1571, and it wasn't even a bunny, it was a hare. And for the people that are just going to pretty much say like, so what? What's the difference? Hare, bunny, they're pretty much the same thing. Slow down. Hares and bunnies cannot crossbreed. Hares and bunnies live in different areas and environments. Hares cannot be domesticated, whereas bunnies can. Hares also live alone unless they're mating, while bunnies stay in packs. They're a herd animal. And hares also have a longer pregnancy cycle than bunnies. So simply saying that they're the same thing, therefore my conclusion still holds, just doesn't actually suffice here. The first Easter Bunny was not a bunny, it was a hare, and it was not a fertility symbol. Now, where does the idea of the Easter Bunny being pagan even come from? It originates in a 19th century book from Jacob Ludwig Karl Grimm, and it is titled, I'm going to butcher this, Deutsche Mythology. And in this book, Grimm claims that the Easter Bunny comes from paganism, while offering no substantive, historical evidence that the bunny was a common fertility cult symbol. Bunnies are very common in the springtime whenever they breed. So in the northern hemisphere and European areas, Germanic-speaking areas, you would often see bunnies in the springtime. They traveled in large packs with frequent mating seasons, and these mating seasons right after winter in the springtime would drastically increase their population, so you would see them a lot during the springtime. Their association with the celebration of Easter and the spring in general can just simply be tied to 16th century Germans attaching the animals to the month of Eostermanath because they're around during that month. So then eventually, since Pascha became associated with that month as well, it is completely logical to expect bunnies to be associated with Easter, as they were already associated with that month, and Pascha began to be associated with that month as well, and eventually became to be called Easter after that month. So there is no evidence that the Easter Bunny was taken from pagan cults and then rebranded by Christians as the Easter Bunny, and we worship the Easter Bunny on Easter instead of Jesus. It doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. What about Easter eggs? Now, this claim is wild. Some people claim that during the festival of Easter, people would paint eggs with the blood from animal and human sacrifices, and they would hide them. And this was in hopes that the gods or Ostara would bless their land for a good harvest or something like that. And if somebody found one of these eggs, it was seen as a symbol of luck. And this is how the tradition of the Easter egg hunt came about. This is completely false. There is no historical evidence supporting this, and we actually know how Easter eggs came to be a tradition, and the earliest reference to Easter eggs comes from 1290, whenever King Edward I decorated 450 hard-boiled eggs with gold leaf and then distributed them among his friends and family. This is the earliest the tradition can be traced back, and nobody at that time even connected the eggs to anything pagan. The only thing they tied it to was his decision to make a fun tradition for Easter, something to do annually to celebrate the day. Eggs were used in this reason during this time because it was also Passover. So eggs were an extremely common food source. They were extremely cheap compared to meat and some other crops and produce. So people would oftentimes boil their hard eggs during Passover because they had to fast during Lent. So they would hard boil their eggs to preserve them so they would last longer, and because of this, people started painting the eggs, and that's where the tradition ties back to, with nothing even suggesting it came from paganism. Eggs were used in other religions and cultural traditions because they were such a common food source. Everybody was eating eggs, so eggs were extremely common, and eggs were not used any more than any other food that is used in rituals across different cult sects and religions and such. So there's not enough evidence to tie Easter eggs to paganism either, as it pretty much just ties to King Edward I starting this tradition. This is another claim that I just recently heard, and it blows my mind, but some people say that the church fathers set the date of Easter to copy the Germanic tribes' Eostermanath Ostara festival, to rebrand it. But there's just two giant issues with this. All that happened at the Council of Nicaea was that the bishops there decided method for calculating the date of Pascha, that being the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, and also Christians had no contact to Anglo-Saxon Germanic culture at that time, so there's absolutely no way they were trying to rebrand Easter because they had no connection to it. It just doesn't make any sense. Pretty much tying this all up and stuff, there is not enough evidence to derive the conclusion that Christians copied from pagans. Just like every other holiday pagan claim about Christianity, all of the evidence either postdates Christians, is created by somebody in the 16th through 19th century, or they're just simply misunderstandings or just a result of ignorance of history and people just making stuff up and laymen being gullible and such. So I have my article pulled up as my notes here. So if this did serve you well, that is awesome. God bless. And don't let those people that are claiming that today is replacing worship of Jesus with worship of eggs and bunnies and such, because that's not it at all. We can still practice and participate in the Easter traditions that come from Christianity and still be mindful of what the day is all about. We are not replacing the purpose of the day with elements that make it more fun and palatable to all people. All we're doing is making it fun and more palatable to all people while still worshiping and glorifying the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So don't let the holiday Nazis shove their false claims down your throat. You can now counter with the actual evidence and the history that debunks all of these claims. With that all said, if you enjoyed this video, I would very much suggest that you visit ptequestionstoeden.com or subscribe to the channel for more videos. And remember to keep asking questions, and God gave you a right to be wrong. God bless.